At her own wedding, my daughter threw her arms around a stranger and, choking up, said in front of 400 guests, "Thank you, Dad." Applause and clinking glasses rippled through the crystal-lined hall. In the front row, her billionaire in-laws sat ramrod straight, eyes polished and proud as if they'd just witnessed a sacred rite. And me, the real father she'd told people was gone. I sat quietly at table 23 by the kitchen door, wearing an $89 rental tux. Heat from the kitchen blew out now and then, burning my chest the way humiliation does. I steadied my breathing, tamped down the tremor, forced a thin smile. My hand found the inside pocket of my jacket, where the final check rested, the switch that could turn this whole party on or off. In just a few more minutes, when I stood up and said what I'd kept to myself, the music would stop, the lights would wobble, and the daughter I'd raised for nearly 30 years would have to face the father she'd buried with her own words. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts, and if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. I'm Harlan Pierce, 70 years old, living out in the suburbs of White Plains, New York. This morning I drove my 2018 Ram 1500, my beat-up work truck, into a line of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces snaking toward the gate at Briarcrest Hall. A baby-faced valet in a black suit looked me up and down like I'd wandered into the wrong world. He opened my door, wrinkled his nose at the grease-stained tool bin on the back seat, and murmured, "I'll park it for you. In the back." I just nodded. Briarcrest Hall glittered like a castle. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers, white flowers running the length of the corridors. The place was booked out for one day only, my daughter Aubrey Pierce's wedding, the kid I'd spent my life raising, teaching, and trusting. I paid most of the bill out of the account for Pierce Mechanical and Properties, the HVAC and building management company I built with sweat and skinned knees. As I stepped into the hall, a headset-wearing attendant hurried up, checked the list. "Mr. Pierce, right? This way, table 23. She gave me a polite smile, but her eyes hesitated. Table 23 sat beside the kitchen door, where servers streamed in and out, food, smells, and heat swirling in the air. I smiled lightly. Good. I like being near where the work is. She didn't get it, just nodded and moved on. From table 23 I had a clean sightline to the center table, the Langford family's head table, the groom's side. Faces carved out of pride. Sterling Langford, the man who owns a half-dozen properties in Manhattan, his wife, Vivienne, platinum bun high, a triple strand of pearls, and their son, Graham, the groom, the one my daughter calls perfect. Aubrey stepped into the lights in an ivory Oscar de la Renta gown worth over $30,000. In that glow she looked like an angel. But when she took the hand of a silver-haired man I'd never met, Douglas Avery, and called him Dad, my heart dropped to the floor. The room burst into gasps and reverent whispers, so moving. Her father looked so dignified. Then someone at a nearby table blurted, "Poor thing. I heard her real father passed away long ago." I sipped my wine and forced the lump down. It tasted more bitter than blood. I knew every bill for this party, from the $25,000 flowers and the $14,000 live band to the 7-tier wedding cake at $9,000 carried my signature. The total was $520,000, with nearly 2/3 already paid. The last check, $360,000, was still in my pocket. That check was the power cord feeding all this sparkle. If I pulled the plug, tonight goes dark. I leaned back and listened to the violins. A server set a flute of champagne before me. I said quietly, "Thanks. Leave the bottle, I'll probably need it." My phone buzzed in my jacket. A text from Aubrey. Just one line. "Dad, please don't talk about HVAC tonight. I want everything perfect." I read it again and again. Nearly 30 years of raising, teaching. Every dollar I poured into private school, college, and a Manhattan apartment, all boiled down to 3 words: "Don't say HVAC." I set the phone on the table and smiled to myself. I got it, my kid was ashamed of me. Across the hall, Lydia Shore, the wedding planner, hustled around with a clipboard. She stopped in front of me, a little out of breath. "Mr. Pierce, just a reminder that the final payment of $360,000 needs to be confirmed before 9:15, so the staff can keep service running through the end." I looked up, voice even. "We'll follow the contract, Lydia. I'll pay, if everything goes as agreed." She froze for a beat, then nodded and moved off, worry flickering in her eyes. I slipped a thick black folder from my inner pocket. Contracts, bank statements, and the entire email chain with Aubrey copied on every message. My kid knew exactly who was footing the bill, she just wanted to forget it tonight. Naomi Park from the Hudson Valley Society Ledger drifted nearby, camera on her chest. I heard a server whisper, "They say there's a hiccup with the final payment." Naomi glanced my way, eyes sharp like she smelled a story about to blow. I looked back and gave a slight nod. No words needed. She understood there was a bigger truth waiting to crack open. I took another sip and looked at my daughter. My daughter, smiling in the lights. People raised glasses, cheered, called her a dream bride. And me, the guy who paid for every petal and note, sat by the kitchen door, hearing pans clatter and a faint scorch from the roast. I thought, if I speak the truth now, they'll call me a wrecker, a jealous old man. I don't have to shout, I just have to pull the plug. I smiled, thinly, and squeezed the black folder. This room was glowing on my dime, buzzing on my sweat, and clapping for a lie. Tonight, I'd teach my daughter the costliest lesson of her life. If you bury your father with your words, don't be surprised when the thing that dies is your own honor. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, in a wooden house by the coal mine where my father worked his whole life without a single vacation. He was a miner who came home with a face caked in black dust, smiled at my mother and said, "As long as our light stays on, son, we beat the dark." Simple words, but they stuck like a vow that wouldn't go out. When he died in a cave-in the year I turned 16, I knew that if I wanted a different life, I had to leave Alabama. I enlisted, became a construction engineer years when my skin burned desert brown and my hands calloused more from drills than pens. After discharge, I followed an old friend to New York with one torn suitcase, a few HVAC certificates, and a decision to start over. The early years were rough. I slept in a shared garage, studied, and worked for a small HVAC outfit. I saved enough to buy an old Ford Econoline work van, silver paint peeling, a toolbox I pieced together from flea markets. That was my first mobile office. HVAC wasn't just installing AC. For me, it was a way to touch real life. I saw families fighting because the heater died in winter, saw the smile when cool air swept a newly fixed room. I didn't just fix machines, I fixed the silence inside people's homes. Then one day a small landlord in Yonkers owed me $7,000 in labor and said he couldn't pay. I didn't argue. "If you want," I told him, "I'll take the basement instead." He agreed, thinking I was kidding. 3 months later I cleared that basement, rebuilt the system, and turned it into my first rental office. That's when I learned. Real assets aren't only in contracts with clients, they're in the vision you dare to have. I kept at it, negotiating, repairing, buying buildings when owners were tapped out or ready to bail. The first 5 years I had nothing but debt and bleeding hands. By year 6 I had 3 buildings, then 7, then 15. Now Pierce Mechanical and Properties manages 27 properties across New York State, from the Bronx to Albany. Last year's revenue was just under $9.4 million, but I still wear a gray oil-stained tee, a hard hat, and climb roofs to check units like any tech. Once, a tenant who didn't know who I was barked, "Get your boss down here." I laughed and said, "He's standing right in front of you. What I built isn't just a company. It's a promise that a kid from the bottom can make something solid as long as he isn't afraid of work and won't sell his soul for appearances. I've never been ashamed of my trade. My daughter is a different story. Aubrey grew up with more than I ever dreamed of. I put her in private school starting 8th grade, over $12,000 a year. When her grades dipped from pressure, I hired a tutor and tried to be present, even if I came home every night smelling like metal and machine oil. When Aubrey got into college in Boston, I cried in the garage. I sold an old truck to cover the first tuition payment, then kept paying for 4 years. After graduation, she said she wanted to start in the arts in Brooklyn. I didn't fully get it, but I still rented a $3,000 a month apartment so she could launch. I thought I was buying time for her to find herself. I didn't realize that while I was crouched in mechanical rooms, she was looking for another last name, Langford. The Langfords believe money belongs with pedigree. Sterling Langford, Graham's father, had a profile in Metropolitan Estates titled "The Man Who Turns Legacy into Empire." To them, I'm just a contractor who smells like steel, a man who doesn't know the tempo of the upper crust handshake. I went to their home more than once, picked up my kid after grand dinners, still wearing my old leather jacket. They smiled, polite and distant. I heard lines like blue-collar work, but at least it's honest, the kind of compliment every poor American hears at least once. I'd stayed quiet through the condescension, thinking my daughter loved a decent man and that's what mattered. But when I was pronounced dead in the middle of her wedding, when they toasted the honorable father who passed, that silence turned into a wound. I left table 23 and stepped into the corridor to breathe. Far off, I caught my reflection in a tall mirror, a tux tight in the shoulders, borrowed shoes shining, the face of a man who once believed family love could outmuscle prejudice. Wrong. Tonight I learned that when gratitude disappears, fake class takes its place. I pulled out my phone and called Elijah Monroe, my lawyer of more than a decade, the man who's helped me write dozens of purchase contracts. His gravelly voice, "Harlan, you okay?" I looked through the doorway where Aubrey was laughing under the chandeliers. "Okay, but I need you to bring the briefcase to Briarcrest Hall, tonight." Elijah was silent a few seconds. "What are you planning?" "I'm not planning anything wrong. I just want to put my name back where it belongs. If they erased me from this party, I'll erase the party." When I hung up, a strange feeling rose, not anger but a cold clarity. I've lived my life in rooms where temperature changes with a single switch. I know every system has a cutoff point, and the one who can touch the right switch is the one with real power. Tonight that power was in my hands, not because I'm richer, but because every invoice in that room bears my signature. They have reputation, lineage, a glossy image in the papers. I have the contract. And in this country, everything from the tallest tower to the grandest wedding stands only as long as the person with the pen wants it to. Baccarat chandeliers cast an icy white glow over Briarcrest Hall, reflecting off clear burgundy glasses and hundreds of pricey South American orchids sprawling down the tables. All of it, from the light to every petal, sat on invoices that read Pierce Mechanical and Properties, which is to say, me. I took a sip, felt the tannins crawl down my throat, and looked around table 23, distant cousins and nameless plus ones, people who exist just to fill a seating chart. No one asked what I did, or who the old man in the rental tux was. Maybe that was better. From where I sat I could see it all. The Langford head table stretched across the room like a stage. I watched how they moved, shook hands, smiled, dipped and turned, a choreography rehearsed to perfection. Business taught me this. Power isn't always about the highest seat. It's about distance to the microphone. The closer you are to the voice, the more you're worth. Tonight I was far enough back to hear the kitchen door swing and the cutlery clink, far enough for everyone to forget I'm the one who lit the room. Soft music floated, violin notes mixing with the smell of wine and makeup. Sterling Langford, the patriarch, stood, smile as pricey as his Swiss watch. He strolled toward me with a glass in hand, easy as a man stepping to a lectern. "Mr. Pierce, right?" His voice was deep, polished to the point of fake. "That's right," I said, standing to shake. His hand was soft and cold, no hint of a callus. "Pleasure. Aubrey's told us so much about you, a very practical man," he stressed, like he was praising a good wrench. "Admirable." I smiled lightly. "Yes, I'm practical, down to the smallest detail." He paused a half-second, then the smile snapped back in place. "Wonderful," he said, patting my shoulder, a gracious little tap, then turned and glided back to center stage. I watched him go and thought, men like Sterling Langford believe politeness is a thick enough blanket to hide their arrogance. Aubrey caught my eye. For a moment, in the wash of music and light, she looked unsettled, like someone yanked her off script. Then it vanished, and she returned to the perfect daughter-in-law act. At the head table, Douglas Avery, introduced as the single father who raised his daughter, lifted a glass and spun tales of bringing up a girl alone. Every line was a little knife to my pride, but I stayed put. I'm used to heat, literally and otherwise. This time, though, I wasn't the one sweating, I was the guy watching the furnace from outside. A server set down the entree, sliced beef with truffle sauce, and whispered, "More wine, Mr. Pierce?" "I'll need more than one glass, kid." He smiled, not getting it, and topped me off. When the band slid into a mellow jazz number, wedding planner Lydia Shore hustled over. Her face was tight under a professional grin. "Mr. Pierce," she murmured, "the final payment of $360,000 needs to be confirmed before 9:15. The staff is asking about overtime. Without that confirmation, service stops at dessert." I checked my watch. 8:05. More than an hour to go. "Lydia," I said slowly, "follow the contract. If service is delivered as promised, everything will be on time." Her smile stiffened. "Of course, sir." She turned away, trying to hide the worry creeping into her eyes. My hand brushed the black folder in my jacket, contracts, statements, and the email threads with Aubrey copied on every single one. I'd prepared for everything, even the chance that tonight turned into a polished humiliation. I spotted Naomi Park circling the photo area, chatting, grinning. She cut a look my way, the sly focus of someone who smells a big story. "Mr. Pierce," she said softly as she came over, "I hear you're sponsoring this evening?" I smiled and shook my head. "Sponsoring's too big a word. I'm just helping with logistics." "So you're the one on the contract with Briarcrest Hall?" I raised my glass so the lights flashed along the rim. "Naomi," I said, "if you want to know who really pays for the light in this room, give it a minute. The answer's about to show itself." Her eyes lit like a cat hearing a mouse. "I'll remember you said that." I looked back to the crowd. Sterling chatted loudly with a bank director. Graham the groom beamed, hand on Aubrey's back. Everything looked perfect to the point of fake. Every chair, light, laugh, all of it, bound up in a contract nobody dared read closely. I pulled out my phone and sent a short text to my lawyer, Elijah Monroe. When I signal, read Clause 7.2 clearly. "That's where we start." Message sent. The band eased into Moon River. People swayed, raised glasses, snapped photos. And I sat in the glitter, a shadow waiting for the switch. I thought of my father, the Alabama miner who never saw a room like this. If he were alive, he'd probably laugh and say, "Don't let them teach you how to breathe in air they made for themselves." I smiled and took another sip. Just a few hours more. When the music stops, I'll be the one flipping the switch, and this room will learn what real cold feels like. When the clock crept toward 8:30, the lights softened. The band struck the opening notes for speeches, and all the side chatter fell away. Every eye turned to the head table where Sterling stood, mic in hand, movement so elegant you'd think he was born to be watched. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in a rich, perfectly rounded tone with a touch of theatrical tremble. "Today is not only the marriage of two young people, but the joining of two families, two worlds." Polite applause snapped like it had been rehearsed. I sat still, glass half full, room washed in gold. Sterling went on, "And tonight I want to offer special thanks to a remarkable man. A father who raised Aubrey to be the strong, refined, compassionate woman she is." He turned the mic toward Douglas Avery, still at the head table, straightening his tie, mustering a humble, misty smile. "Mr. Douglas," Sterling said, "you're proof that a father's love can overcome any trial. Thank you for raising such a wonderful daughter." 400 guests rose and clapped. Some dabbed tears. The band shifted keys, violins stretching the moment. I sat in it, the sound pounding my ears like a mallet. In a corner I spotted a few familiar faces, my technicians. I'd invited them. They helped install the HVAC and lighting in this very room. They didn't clap. They just stood there looking at me. They knew who actually kept this hall cool and paid for the air everyone was breathing. A young server came to refill my glass, awkward when he saw it untouched. I said quietly, "No need, kid. I've got something to do." I drew a long breath and stood. No rush, no stumble. What I felt wasn't anger, it was the pure calm of a man who's had enough. I walked past the rows of chairs. The wedding planner, Lydia Shore, rushed over, her face tight. "Mr. Pierce, please." I lifted the badge on my chest. "Client, Pierce." She went silent and stepped back. I headed straight for the stage where Sterling had just handed the mic to Douglas Avery. The spotlight froze everything in place. I could feel 400 eyes lock on me, and strangely, my heartbeat was steady. Douglas Avery looked at me, his smile turning to stone. Sterling frowned, moving as if to block me, but I'd already taken the mic. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low and clear. "I'll only take a minute." No one reacted in time. The band stopped, servers froze mid-motion, and the entire hall fell into a thick, heavy silence. "I'm Harlan Pierce," I said slowly, "and I am Aubrey Pierce's father." The room iced over. I heard a glass tap a plate, someone drop a dessert fork. Aubrey stood rigid, face drained, lips parted with no sound coming out. "I know you just heard a very moving speech," I went on, "about a father who raised his daughter alone, about love and sacrifice. But I need to clarify one small thing. That man had never met my daughter until tonight." A wave of whispers swept the room like wind skimming a window. Sterling blinked and stepped back half a pace. Douglas Avery lowered his head, his hands clenching. I opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "This," I said, lifting them, "is the rental contract for Briarcrest Hall, totaling $180,000 signed by Harlan Pierce. Here's the sound contract, the flowers, the catering, all signed by Pierce." I laid them on the lectern, sheet by sheet. Each thud on the wood was a cut through the party's polished shell. "And this," I continued, taking out my phone, "is the email chain between the wedding planner and the bride. Aubrey was CC'd on every message. She knew exactly who was paying for this dream." I read 3 lines, slow enough for every word to drop like a stone. "Mr. Pierce confirmed payment. Aubrey, please review the invoice attached. Final transfer pending confirmation from Mr. Pierce's account." I looked up. The room was so silent I could hear breathing. Sterling stammered, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." Douglas Avery bowed his head lower, his shoulders trembling. Aubrey stood between them, shaking, tears starting to spill. I drew a breath and leveled my voice. "No misunderstanding, Mr. Langford. Someone simply forgot to read the signature line." I opened my banking app. The screen's glow lit my face and reflected in hundreds of eyes. "I want you to see this," I said, holding up the cool display. "A $360,000 transfer status, pending approval. I hold the approval for the final payment on this event. Not one flower here, not one glass of wine gets paid for unless I press this button." The air thickened. Some guests glanced at each other and pushed their chairs back. The band stood still, no one daring to move. I continued, low and precise. "Miss Catherine Brooks, venue manager at Briarcrest Hall, please meet me backstage. We'll discuss service conditions as laid out in the contract." I set the mic on the stand. The stage lights still burned into my face. I could feel every gaze on me, some confused, some angry, and a few respectful. Aubrey stepped forward half a pace, trying to speak, but I raised a hand gently. "Not now, sweetheart. Tonight isn't a night for fairy tales anymore." I turned and walked off the stage, slow, steady steps, while behind me the murmurs spread like fire meeting wind. The same guests who just applauded the honorable father were now whispering, trying to figure out who actually paid for this dream party. And in that instant I realized, I didn't need to shout, didn't need revenge. I only had to tell the truth, and it would burn down the pretty lies they'd built all by itself. The room still hummed with 100 threads of whispering, like a strange breeze circling the crystal ceiling. I stepped off stage, the lights tracking my heels. In the corridor toward the back rooms, Catherine Brooks, the Briarcrest Hall manager, was already waiting. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her professional eyes were tight with worry. Beside me, my attorney, Elijah Monroe, appeared as if he'd been posted there all along, black briefcase clamped in his hand. "Mr. Pierce," Catherine began, keeping her voice polite, "we need confirmation of the final payment before we move to the next part of the reception. It's 9:12 p.m. I checked my watch and smiled calmly. "Good. We have 3 minutes to do this by the book." Elijah opened the case and took out a stamped contract, the thick pages stacked cleanly. He adjusted his glasses, flipped to page 14, and read slowly and clearly, his warm baritone rolling down the hall. Clause 7.2. The final payment will be made when and only when the services provided meet the standards, professionalism, and the host's honor. If any act or condition at the event is deemed to damage the host's honor, the client has the right to suspend or cut payment until the claim is resolved. Catherine pressed her lips together. She knew the line was real. I'd signed it in her office 3 months ago when they were eager to close the royal package for the wedding. They needed the contract. I needed an honor clause, and now that little clause was a double-edged blade. I spoke evenly. "Miss Catherine, tonight at an event run by Briarcrest Hall, I, the host and the person paying for the entire contract, was publicly declared deceased, and a stranger was introduced as the bride's real father. That's not just a breach of respect. It's a direct insult to my honor. I believe that's enough to trigger Clause 7.2. Catherine swallowed. "I understand your frustration, sir, but if funds are not received before 9:15 p.m. per protocol, extended services like music, bar, and table service will automatically shut down." I cut in, still calm but firm. "I choose to shut it down." She froze. Elijah said nothing, only gave a small nod, like stamping a legal seal on my words. From the distance came Sterling Langford's voice, loud and sharp as a clock hitting the floor. "What is this circus, Pierce? You're destroying your daughter's wedding." I turned. His eyes were bloodshot, tie crooked, forehead slick with sweat. "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm just done paying for a party that humiliates me." Sterling stepped closer, pointing at my face. "I'll sue you. You hear me? Damage to our reputation, breach of contract, losses to the Langfords." Elijah lifted another sheet and sliced through his rant with the calm of a man used to rich bullies. "Mr. Langford, please read the indemnity section on page 16, he said. "If the event is suspended due to a violation of the honor clause, Briarcrest Hall has no obligation to refund, and reputational liability falls on the party who caused the initial harm. In this case, That party is not my client." Sterling clamped his jaw shut. I watched him scan the room for support and find only silence. Even the band had stopped. Strings hung slack like snapped thread. I pulled the $360,000 check from my pocket. The paper gleamed, uncreased, my signature still fresh. I looked at it for 1 second, drew a deep breath and tore it in half. The rip cracked dry and loud, bounced off wood paneling, and hit the floor like a smokeless blast. When I tore that check, the room went dead quiet. But inside me, something else tore too. A father's trust. "I don't know if it were you, would you have done it? Tell me in the comments, do you think I did the right thing, or was I too harsh?" Catherine exhaled hard, eyes wide. Sterling stumbled back a step, face flushing. Somewhere in the hall a voice gasped, "Oh my God." I folded the two halves and set them on a nearby table. "Now it's clear," I said. "The final payment canceled." Elijah nodded to confirm, then turned to Catherine. "Please initiate Briarcrest Hall's standard protocol for suspended payment." Catherine drew a steady breath and pressed her radio button. In less than a minute, the music cut out completely. Bartenders capped bottles and sealed the bar. Servers cleared tables as guests stared in confusion. The lights dimmed to an energy-saving glow, leaving only the chandeliers glittering, coldly. The ballroom felt oddly empty. Laughter broke off. Whispers spread in small waves. I saw phones come out, cameras up. Reporter Naomi Park had already reached a spot by the door, her recorder aimed straight at me. I heard her murmur to someone beside her, "A textbook case of contract power and a host's honor." Some guests began filing out, gowns rustling. The haughty air evaporated like spilled wine. Aubrey rushed up, eyes wet, face pale. "Dad, please stop, what are you doing? They'll never forget this." I set my hand on her shoulder, gently but firmly enough to hold her in place. My voice dropped, not angry, just heavy with sorrow. "I'm not paying to purchase my own humiliation, Aubrey. Did you forget? Honor can't be outsourced." Tears slid down her face. I wanted to say more, but stopped. In that moment, I knew no words would teach her, only the consequences now unfolding. Behind us, Catherine spoke into her radio, quiet and crisp. "All staff, early shutdown protocol. Close bar, clear glassware, stop table service." Chairs scraped, dishes clinked hard. People who'd sat in the front row of high society now stood awkwardly, unsure where to look. Sterling froze in place. Douglas Avery avoided my eyes. The band packed up, and footsteps pounded in the wings. I stepped back and took a long breath, taking in the scene, the crystal reflections now dull as glass without fire. The Langfords' grand wedding, the one they'd bragged about to every paper, slipped out of their hands in 10 minutes. When I turned away, the house lights were at their lowest. The backstage door shut behind me, leaving the hiss of whispers and snapping cameras. And in that noise I heard one thing loud and clear inside myself. I haven't aged because of time. I've aged because truth sometimes arrives later than we deserve. That night, I left Briarcrest Hall not with a victory, but with a silence heavy enough to bring the whole room down. The air inside the ballroom felt thick, like someone had switched off all the ventilation. The music was dead. The warm golden bulbs were just faint smears on confused faces. From 400 guests, only the scrape of chairs, soft breaths, and rippling questions. Who's the real father then? Why would she erase him from her own wedding? The Langfords, hiding something like this? Each question was a blade, cutting not just their reputation but peeling back the truth they'd tucked under silk and pricey wine. At the front table, the fake father, Douglas Avery, shot to his feet, ghost pale. He said nothing, just bowed his head and slipped out a side door into a dim hallway. No farewell, no call to stop him. The whole room watched the shrinking back of a man walking off a role he was ashamed of. Sterling tried to keep calm, but I saw his hand shake on the phone. He turned away, whispering orders. "Wire it now. Understood. 360,000. I want it in the next 10 minutes. I don't care which account. But Catherine, the venue manager, stepped up, her voice clear and firm. I'm sorry, Mr. Langford, but without funds, extended services are officially stopped. Per the contract, the hall may only be used until 10:30 p.m. Sterling stared her down. Do you know who I am? I do, sir, Catherine said, still professional. But my contract is with Mr. Pierce. He's the only one who decides here. I said nothing. In that moment I saw it. Plain money can't buy back honor, and reputation can't replace a signature. Some guests stood and gathered their things. A few looked my way and nodded. James Whitmore, who runs an HVAC company that's worked with me, gripped my hand. You just taught them one expensive lesson, Harlan. I've never seen anyone pull this off in a high society ballroom. I smiled lightly. Every lesson has a price, James. Sometimes not paying is the real mistake. Across the room, Aubrey still hadn't moved. When I looked at her, she broke down, voice cracking. Dad, you destroyed 27 years of us over one party? I stepped closer and set a hand on her shoulder, my voice low and heavy as stone. No, Aubrey. You tore it first when you called someone else Dad, when you stood before hundreds and let them believe I was dead. She lowered her head, shoulders shaking, tears spotting the polished marble. My own throat tightened, but I couldn't soften. I knew if I did now, everything I'd just done would dissolve into nothing. In the dim light, reporter Naomi Park approached, camera still in hand. She looked at me and asked quietly, on the record, Mr. Pierce, what's the real motive here? Is this revenge on your daughter? I looked straight into the lens, calm, deeper, and rougher than ever. No, Miss Park. I'm not getting back at anyone. I'm choosing self-respect. She held my gaze, nodded, and clicked off the camera. In her eyes I saw less curiosity and more respect. I turned to leave when Sterling edged back over. His voice was smaller now, shaky but straining for authority. Pierce, Harlan, let me make this right. How much do you want? I'll pay. We're both businessmen, right? Everything's negotiable. I looked at him until his smile died. Mr. Langford, I said slowly, I don't sell fatherhood. He stepped back like I'd slapped him with the truth. Across the way, the groom, Graham Langford, sat stunned, face blank. He wasn't looking at me anymore, he was staring at his wife. In his eyes I saw doubt, collapse, and hurt. I knew then their marriage had cracked not because of me, but because it was built on a lie. By the wings, the wedding planner, Lydia Shore, lingered in silence. But her eyes said it all. She knew who the real client was, who was truly keeping this room alive. I looked around the ballroom that had shone like a castle now looked like its own husk. South American orchids drooped in the dim. Burgundy sat unfinished in glasses. The band boxed their instruments. Chairs emptied. Tuxedos and gowns drifted by, leaving a trail of expensive perfume mixed with a metallic chill. In under 30 minutes, the gala that was supposed to be a beacon of glory was just an empty room. I stood in that space and listened to the wind through the HVAC, the system I'd designed and installed for this place whispering through the ducts. That sound was familiar, like the breath of work, of labor, of all the years of sweat my daughter once thought were something to be ashamed of. Now that sound was the only heartbeat still echoing in the room. Aubrey was still at the front table, eyes red, fingers clenched around a wine glass with a chipped rim. I looked at her and, for the first time, didn't see the girl raised in love. I saw a woman pulled down from the tower of her own illusions. No audience, no fireworks, no speeches. Only the truth, bare and cold, yet as clear as the last light still burning in a room where the music had died. And in that scene I understood applause proves nothing. It's when the whispering starts that the real masks fall. 3 days after that silent wedding night, I just poured my morning coffee and sat at the old wooden desk in my office when Elijah Monroe walked in holding a newspaper. He set it down without a word. On the front page of the Hudson Valley Society Ledger was a bold headline over a photo of me in the ballroom, mic in hand. High-profile Briarcrest Hall wedding goes silent over Clause 7.2. The byline read, Naomi Park. I sat still and read every line. Naomi wrote with restraint but sharp as a blade. She laid out the whole sequence, the flawless event, my walk to the stage, and how everything stopped with a single clause. She didn't use bitter words or praise. She just presented the facts, my identity, Pierce, mechanical, and properties. The bass plays contract with Briarcrest Hall, and Clause 7.2, final payment only when service meets standards and the host's honor. In a sidebar, Naomi quoted parts of the invoices, masking sensitive figures but leaving the signer's name, Harlan Pierce. She mentioned the man introduced as the biological father called him a fake dad and quoted me verbatim, I'm not paying to purchase my own humiliation. I folded the paper. Elijah said quietly, she kept her promise. No spin, no hype, but you should know the aftershocks are coming fast. And they did faster than anyone expected. That afternoon, social media exploded. News sites reposted the article. The video Naomi shot that night spread across forums. The clip of me tearing the check and saying, I choose to stop to protect my honor showed up on TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, chopped into thousands of versions. Underneath, the comments split in two. He's the bravest father I've ever seen. I don't know whether to admire him or be afraid of him. Either way, the truth is the truth. His daughter was ashamed of her father's job. That's the saddest part. Half the internet called me a working-class hero. The other half called me cold and ruthless. But amid all that emotion, there was one thing nobody denied. The facts were clear. No one questioned who actually signed the contracts anymore. No one believed the real father has passed away story. 2 days later, New York Business Weekly covered the incident, this time focusing on the legal angle. They called it an interesting precedent in high-end events, when honor becomes a contract clause. One attorney commented, it's rare to see someone clear-headed and bold enough to put an honor condition in a $500,000 contract, and even rarer to see it enforced. The news spread faster than I expected, and the fallout spread just as fast. Thursday afternoon I got a call from Catherine Brooks. Her voice was a bit tired but still polite. Mr. Pierce, Briarcrest Hall's inbox is flooded. Sub-vendors are demanding immediate payment from the Langford family for the remaining costs. A few have cut post-wedding credit. I don't think they expected you to flip the board like this. I simply answered, thank you, Catherine. I never wanted to destroy anyone. I just want people to understand that the words self-respect don't appear on an invoice, but they're what make an invoice worth anything. Catherine chuckled softly. You know, my staff is still talking about it. Everyone says it's the first time they've seen a client make the upper crust go silent. I hung up and looked out the window. June sky, sunlight draped over buildings I'd once repaired and rented. Maybe that's why I didn't feel triumphant or happy. I only felt tired but at peace. The next day, another wave hit the news. A Connecticut Society magazine ran a piece, The Langfords and the Lesson of Image. They listed 2 charity boards in Greenwich withdrew invitations to work with Sterling Langford. An art auction event his wife once backed paused its sponsorship. At elite lunches, the erased father story became back kitchen gossip. People who used to call Sterling the man with the golden touch now avoided saying his name. In contrast, my Pierce Mechanical and Properties unexpectedly drew interest. 3 real estate companies in New Jersey and the Hudson sent partnership proposals. A regional commercial bank invited me to open a business credit line, saying they were impressed by your ethical principles in business. When Elijah heard, he just laughed. You didn't just keep your honor, Harlan. You accidentally taught our whole legal crowd that an honor clause can be a lawful weapon. But what moved me most didn't come from the press. It came from the people who work with me. Saturday morning, I walked into the maintenance shop. The tech crew was drinking coffee, chatting. As I passed, they all stood. One spoke for the group. "Boss, we saw the video. Thanks for doing the right thing. Not everyone with money dares to stand up for honor like that." I nodded without a word. My chest warmed with a feeling I'd forgotten being truly respected. Not for money, not for status, but for character. That afternoon, I sat alone in my office. The phone lit up a few times with unknown numbers, interview requests, and a few partnership invites. But there was one empty space on the screen: no Aubrey. I'd left my ringer on for 3 days just to prove to myself I was still waiting, but my kid stayed silent. I didn't blame her. When someone's world collapses, they need silence to pick up the pieces. I understood. I'd been there too when I'd lost everything and had to rebuild with my own hands. I opened my laptop and wrote a short email, just 7 words. "When you're ready to tell the truth, I'm here." I didn't expect a reply. I sent it anyway, to keep the door between us from closing. When the screen confirmed, "Message sent," I leaned back and watched the last light of the day come through the glass. Outside, my crew was welding a new duct. The metal rang in a steady rhythm, the sound of work, of everyday life, of real people. And I thought, at my age, I don't need victories. I just need to know I chose the right thing, even if it costs me the silence of the person I love most. 2 weeks after Naomi Park's article, just as the public chatter began to calm, my phone rang again. On the other end was Elijah Monroe, his voice low but clear. "Harlan, you should hear this before it hits the news. Graham Langford just filed for annulment. Grounds: misrepresentation of identity before marriage." I was quiet. Not surprised, just washed over by a sadness I couldn't name. Elijah continued. "Their attorneys are using misrepresentation of family identity to ask the court to void the wedding. They won't wait for a divorce. They want it erased as if it never happened." I closed my eyes. I'd seen it coming the moment I watched Graham look at Aubrey on that chaotic night, the first look of a man realizing he married someone who wasn't real. The news spread like flame on paper. 3 days later, the New York Daily Society ran, "Graham Langford files for annulment, says he never knew about fake dad at the wedding." That line became the headline for every article, every comment thread, every podcast about the $500,000 wedding and the erased father. The legal papers brought more aftershocks. Aubrey lost her job at a Manhattan art gallery. Her director sent an email. "Thank you for your time, but given the sensitive media situation, we can't continue." I heard it through an old friend in the field. I didn't feel satisfied. I just thought, some lessons, however harsh, are still necessary. The upscale apartment on 73rd Avenue, the one I paid for during her first 2 years, couldn't be sustained. The monthly transfers I'd set up were canceled. Aubrey moved to an extended stay hotel, a small room, kitchenette, budget rate for long-term stays. From a view of Central Park, my daughter now looked out at a parking lot. One evening, Sterling Langford called me. His voice was hoarse, stripped of the polish of a man used to speaking in public. "Pierce," he said, "are you satisfied? Your daughter lost her husband, her job, her reputation. What exactly did you teach? That you're always right?" I let him finish, then answered evenly. "I don't pay to buy lies, Sterling. I taught my daughter the one thing she forgot, that you can't build happiness on pretend." Silence held the line a long time before he hung up. Maybe he understood in the image game the winner isn't the richest, but the one who takes responsibility for the truth. One Sunday morning I went to a small suburban church, the one I used to take Aubrey to when she was little. I met Pastor Clay again, the man who saw me start with 2 empty hands. He looked at me, smiling as gently as ever. "Harlan, I heard. You did the hardest thing a father can do. you let your child fall." I nodded, saying nothing. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't lift her up too soon. Let her fall hard enough to learn how to stand." That stayed with me all day. That afternoon, I opened my email. In my inbox was a note from a former client, the one who hired us to install HVAC for a community hospital in Yonkers. The first line read, "Mr. Pierce, I read your story. I wish I'd dared do the same 10 years ago when my son started looking down on me because I was just an electrician. Thank you for reminding us honor still exists in this world." I read it over and over, and my heart softened, not from pride, but because I understood the loneliness in every word. People like me who work with our hands and keep our word with our hearts sometimes trade peace to hold on to something invisible: dignity. The next day, a reporter from the Chronicle Review emailed an interview request. They wanted to hear the story behind Clause 7.2 and the mindset of a father who chose truth over optics. I replied with one line: "That story doesn't belong to the crowd anymore." I didn't need more applause. I just wanted quiet. But the crowd didn't quiet down. When Graham Langford filed his annulment in court, the press swarmed him too. In his public statement he said, "I had no knowledge of the so-called fake dad. If I had, I would never have allowed the wedding to go forward." That sentence ended short and cold, like a verdict without a judge. All the faith, all the shine Aubrey tried to build, shattered. That night, I got a text. "Sender, Aubrey." Just 4 words. "I'm afraid of Dad's voice." I stared at the screen a long time. Then I typed, "I won't yell. I'll listen when you tell the truth." The message went out. No reply. But I knew for the first time since the wedding, my kid had knocked on the door. That was a start. I didn't go home that night. I drove to Building 11, the first office property I bought nearly 20 years ago. I took the stairs to the roof and opened the mechanical room ducts, running long industrial fans humming steady. The fans hissed softly, neither fast nor slow, moving air through steel runs. I stood in the middle of that room, breathing in the manufactured cool, and realized life has to keep running. No matter how reputation, money, or image collapse, these fans still spin to hold the temperature, to keep everything from choking. I thought of my daughter, of how her eyes might look when she stands before a judge, different from that wedding night. Maybe someday she'll understand. No AC is strong enough to cool the truth. And no amount of fame is big enough to hide a lie about a father's love. That night, the city slept. I sat alone in Building 11's mechanical room, the only light coming from my phone on the table. The clock hit exactly 1 a.m. when it rang and the screen showed the name I'd waited more than half a month to see. "Aubrey." I answered and didn't speak first. On the other end, just short breaths. Then her voice, small and shaking. "Dad, I lost everything." I didn't feel smug. I wasn't waiting to hear that. I just asked slowly, my voice lower and softer than ever, "Who did you lose first?" A silence. Then she whispered, "You." That answer cinched my heart tight. I turned to the window and looked at the ribbon of headlights on the highway. "Good," I said quietly. "If you know that, you haven't lost everything." Aubrey broke down, sobbing hard and far but real in my ear. Through the tears, she said, "I was afraid of being looked down on, Dad. Afraid people would know you do HVAC. Afraid they'd smell machine oil on your shirt. Afraid they'd laugh. I just wanted them to think I belonged somewhere else. I was wrong. I stayed quiet for a long time. I saw myself 30 years ago, 32, driving a beat-up van, hands greasy and sweating, dreaming of buying a single small building. "Aubrey," I said, steady but heavy. The day I signed for my first building, my hands were still sweaty. The pen shook because my palms were slick. The broker offered me a towel, but I didn't take it. I was proud of that sweat. It was the price of every brick. On the line, she was silent. I heard her draw a deep breath, like she was swallowing each word. You think the smell of oil makes people look down on you, I went on. But really, it's the smell of someone who lives by their own hands. You forgot, without that smell, there wouldn't be lit parties, or apartments cool enough for silk dresses without sweat. I paused, then added, slow, like teaching from the ground up. Self-respect isn't something you can borrow or lend. It's not in a check, and it's not in a compliment. It's in the way you look in the mirror without shame. I heard her answer, just a small, I know. I smiled slightly. No, you're learning to know, and learning has to start somewhere. I looked around the room, tool chests, schematics, the project board on the wall. Then I said, I'm not opening my wallet, Aubrey, but I'm opening my office door. She was quiet again, only her breathing. Monday morning, 7 a.m., I continued. Not at home at Pierce Mechanical and Properties. If you come to make money, you'll quit fast. But if you come to learn, you'll get a new life. This time the silence lasted longer. I didn't push. I knew she was fighting between pride and the hunger to begin again. 10 seconds, 20. Then her voice, trembling. Monday. I'll come. I shut my eyes and drew a long breath. Something warm spread through my chest, not happiness but careful hope. Good, I said, lower. I'll be waiting. Don't be late. The call ended. The screen went still, its glow pooling on the metal tabletop. I sat a while longer, listening to the fans, with a faint oil smell in the air, the smell my daughter once hated. Now I hoped she'd learn to recognize it as the scent of truth. I opened my laptop and clicked on the desk lamp. White light hit the paper. I took out my planner and wrote the header. 6-month internship plan, Aubrey Pierce. I didn't write with pity. I wrote with principles. Month 1. Observe technical workflows. Learn safety rules. Go on site with maintenance crews. Month 2. Logging. Regular reports. Learn cooling system analysis. Month 3. Handle customer complaints. Work directly with the service team. Month 4. Supervise a small contract on her own. Month 5. Participate in cost control. Prepare profit and loss reports. Month 6. Full evaluation. At the end, I added one line, not for an employee, but for my daughter. No favoritism, no exceptions. Self-respect starts with owning every action. I closed the notebook, set down the pen, and leaned back. Outside, dawn started to thin the darkness at the horizon. I heard the fan still turning, air pulling through the ducts, the sound of a world that keeps running despite the hurt. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Not because I'd forgiven, but because my daughter finally knocked on the right door. Monday morning, right at 7 a.m., I was at the office. The glass doors caught the first sun, dust hanging in the cool air. I brewed coffee, opened the planner, and watched the clock. When the hand hit the 12. The door opened. Aubrey walked in. No dress, no Italian bag, no expensive perfume, just a gray polo, old jeans, sneakers, hair tied back. She bowed, her head slightly, and spoke softly but clearly. Good morning, Dad. I gave a small nod. Good morning, new hire. I took her to the dispatch center where 90% of the company's operations get managed. Phones rang non-stop, screens lit with hundreds of tickets. 4th floor AC down, low-pressure valve leak, unusual rooftop noise. No flowers, no burgundy, no band or crystal lights. Just coffee smell, machine oil, and people working. I introduced her. This is Maya Ortiz, head of dispatch. 31 years old, 6 years experience. She'll be your direct boss. Aubrey nodded and shook her hand. Maya smiled, no flattery, no sneer. Just one line. Welcome to the only place where reputation doesn't matter, only results do. I left her there, surrounded by paperwork, ringing phones, and the shift schedule. I didn't want to hover. Every beginning needs a little solitude. In the first week, Aubrey learned the ticket process, taking customer calls, logging details, assigning techs, updating notes. At first she stumbled, speaking like she was at a banquet. "Hello, I'm Aubrey Pierce. How may I assist you?" Maya nudged her gently. "This isn't a hotel front desk. Talk like you truly want to help." That afternoon, I walked by and heard my daughter again, deeper and steadier. "Yes, I understand. I'll have someone there within 45 minutes. Thanks for your patience." That voice wasn't a debutante anymore, it was one of my employees. In week 2, Maya sent Aubrey out with the field techs. They hit old buildings in Brooklyn, climbed rusty ladders, checked ducts in the rain. For the first time, she saw workers on a metal roof in wind and downpour, still measuring pressure. That night, I saw her name in the report. A. Pierce on site from 7:20 a.m. to 6:15 p.m. Completed support for return air temp readings. I said nothing, but my heart warmed in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. By the third week, Maya put her on the night shift. Those hours are when almost no one wants to work. The pickiest customers call in, equipment fails without warning, techs are tired, and everyone's fuse is short. One night, I dropped by and saw the dispatch room light still on. Aubrey was hunched over taking notes, a cup of cold coffee beside her. I didn't go in, but I heard her clearly through the glass. "Yes, I'm sorry about the noise. It's an older system, but we'll fix it. I know you need your sleep, ma'am. I'll send someone right away." No defensiveness, no blaming, just a real apology. One rainy afternoon, I got word she'd gone up on a roof with the tech crew to check pressure. I headed up just to watch from a distance. In the gray rain, she wore a safety jacket, hair soaked and stuck to her face, hands shaking around a gauge. A tech showed her how to read the numbers. She nodded, murmuring, "Return pressure's lower than supply, that means a leak." I didn't praise her. But inside, I knew my daughter was starting from scratch, not learning how to talk, but how to do. Friday night, I called Aubrey into my office. I showed her the company's investment plan, the property leasing side. I pointed to one project, building 15 leaking roof, bad piping, asking price $1.4 million. "Do you know why I'm buying it?" I asked. Aubrey shook her head. "Because other people see what's broken. I see what can be fixed. Profit doesn't come from appearances. It comes from sweat." I opened the payroll folder and handed her a sheet. $41,000 a year, bumped a bit for nights. Aubrey read it, glanced up. "I get it. No policy of affection here, right?" I smiled. "Right. Here we only have a policy of fairness. Affection is the last reward, not the first condition." Time passed. Days in the shop and out on site slimmed Aubrey down a little and tanned her up, but her eyes changed the most. No more defensiveness. No more empty stare from the wedding night. One late evening, while we were reviewing the monthly report together, she said quietly, "Dad, I'm ashamed that I was ashamed of you." I looked at her a long time. In my eyes, she wasn't the kid who'd forgotten her roots anymore, but someone working off a debt with her own hands. I only said, "I hear you, but don't repeat it with words, repeat it with action." Aubrey nodded and said nothing else. A few days later, Naomi Park emailed asking for an interview. 1 year after Briarcrest Hall, she wanted the daughter's side. I forwarded it to Aubrey without comment. 3 hours later, she sent it back with one line. I answered, "No, thank you. I'm learning." I read it and felt lighter. Because finally, my daughter understood. Not every lesson needs to be told to the public. Some lessons only have value when lived quietly, with real hands and real sweat. That night, I turned off the office lights and looked through the glass wall. The girl in the gray polo sat under the fluorescent lamp, studying a refrigeration schematic. I smiled to myself. No more apologies needed. The way she worked was enough. That January was so cold the metal in the ducts seemed to shrink. New York was white under a sheet of snow, and I remember that night clearly, January 13th, 11:47 p.m. The dispatch phone rang 3 times and went dead. 10 seconds later, the emergency line blared. I hadn't even stepped out of my office when Maya Ortiz rushed in, face pale. "Mr. Pierce, the central boiler at Maple Residence 18 stories just went down. Tenants are panicking. The sensors show temps falling below 45 degrees. I nodded. "Mobilize the emergency tech team." "Who's on dispatch?" Maya said. "Aubrey." I paused for just a heartbeat enough to feel a stir in my chest. "Good," I said. "Let her run it." Maple Residence is one of the oldest properties. We still maintain cast iron pipes, manual valves, a boiler from the 1990s. When it fails in a snowstorm, the cost isn't just money, it's people's breath. In dispatch, the phones wouldn't stop. Aubrey stood in the middle, headset on, voice oddly calm. "Yes, we have the alert. Our tech team is on the way. Please stay inside your unit. Don't use the gas stove for heat. I know it's cold. We're moving as fast as we can." Beside her, Maya directed the crews. "Team 2 to the basement with backup pressure sensors. Team 3, source replacement parts. Call the 24/7 parts warehouse in the Bronx." Aubrey dialed right away. I could hear her voice plain as day. "Hi, this is Pierce Mechanical. We need an R32 thermostat relay. Rush delivery in 90 minutes. I know it's late, we'll pay the surcharge." "Thanks, we'll send a van to pick up right now." A young staffer fretted. "How do we calm tenants? Everyone's calling and yelling." Aubrey turned and kept it short. "Call every floor. Ask who's the oldest, who has infants. Prioritize heated blankets. Call me if anyone needs someone to sit with them." Her voice didn't shake, it wasn't barking orders. It was dispatching with a heart. Around 1:30 a.m., the outside temp dropped to 9 below. An alert came in. 12th floor has a veteran living alone. Room temp 44 degrees. He's shivering. Without hesitating, Aubrey grabbed a bag of heated blankets, jumped in the truck, and rode with a tech. She knocked on the 12th floor door. An old man named George Whitman, 82, a Gulf War vet, living alone with an old dog. He was wrapped in blankets, trembling, muttering, "Just a few more minutes." Aubrey knelt, tucked another blanket around him and said, voice shaking in the cold, "We're fixing it, Mr. Whitman. I promise you'll hear the heat come back soon." The old man smiled faintly. "Your voice sounds familiar. You're a Pierce, aren't you? Sounds like the man who kept me warm 3 winters straight." Aubrey froze, eyes glassy. She didn't answer, just held his hand tight. She stayed until 3 a.m., carrying hot cocoa up from the lobby for nearby units, apologizing and smiling gently through foggy breaths. At 4:15 a.m., a message from Maya lit up the board. "Maple Residence boiler restart complete. Temps rising. Pressure stable." In the blue-black night, windows began to glow again. As the heat lifted off the floors, doors opened and tenants applauded, not because anyone told them to, because they felt the real effort of people they'd never met. Aubrey burst into tears, not from exhaustion but from joy, from being useful. I arrived at 5 a.m., snow still drifting. The crew was packing up their tools. I didn't walk over. From a distance I saw my daughter in a safety vest, hair matted with water, cheeks reddened by the cold. She was pouring hot cocoa from a big thermos, handing cups to people lined up in the lobby. Her smile was tired but genuine, nothing like the one she wore at Briarcrest Hall. I didn't pat her shoulder or praise her. I just stood back, let the cold wind slap my face, and watched the child I thought I'd lost now finding herself with her own hands. The next morning, when I powered up my computer, there was an email from the Maple Residence Tenants Board. The subject line read, "Thank you, Pierce Mechanical and Properties, especially Miss Aubrey Pierce." They recounted the night in detail and mentioned the young woman with hot cocoa and a calm that reassured tenants more than the heaters. I said nothing when I finished. I just printed it and filed it under special personnel. That afternoon, I drove Aubrey to Briarcrest Hall, the place that once was a battlefield between us. By day, it looked colder and emptier than memory. The glossy wood floor felt soulless. White light through long curtains made everything look dusted by time. I stopped in the grand hall where the baccarat chandeliers once blazed and music flooded the air. I asked, "Do you hear it?" Aubrey listened and nodded softly. "Silence," she said. I looked up at the ceiling and answered slowly. "Right. The silence from that night. The kind of silence when people think they're winning, but they're actually losing to themselves." Aubrey bowed her head and tears fell. I turned and spoke gently. "You know, we don't do revenge, Aubrey. We fix things, people included." She looked up and asked in a small voice, "Dad, will you forgive me?" I looked at my daughter a long time. Outside, weak winter sun cut a thin strip of light on the floor. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't a moment. It's a verb in progress. Every day we forgive a little more when we see real effort." Aubrey cried openly and didn't try to hide it. I let her. No lecture can do what real tears can. That night back at the office, Naomi Park texted me, "Do you ever regret doing all that, Mr. Pierce?" I typed back without thinking long, "No. But if you write the ending, write this. A father chose repair over fire." I shut the laptop and leaned back. Outside, the snow had stopped. In my mind, I saw Aubrey standing among a crowd, holding a jug of hot cocoa, face speckled with sweat and snow, a daughter learning to mend the world she once broke. And in that moment I knew we'd finally fixed the most important thing, a father and a child. 6 months passed as quickly as a cold season turning warm. I still reached the office at 6:30 a.m., still drank black coffee, still checked every technical report before signing. But one thing changed. The person knocking on my door every Monday morning wasn't Maya anymore. It was Aubrey. She had finished the internship I'd laid out, passed every test in tech, service, and transparency. No flowery words, just real numbers. 23 emergency calls handled, 19 positive customer reviews, 0 procedural violations. But what made me proud wasn't on paper. In an internal meeting as we discussed service policy for low-income clients, Aubrey stood and spoke firmly. "I think we should have a no-shame policy. If a client can't afford a premium package, give our techs permission to recommend the minimal safe solution, no upselling, no judgment. They don't need pity, they need respect." The room went silent. I looked around, engineers, dispatchers, people who once saw her as the boss's kid, all nodding. I said only one line, "Put it in the official procedures, and name it exactly what she called it, no shame." 3 weeks later, I signed a promotion making Aubrey a project coordinator at $52,000 a year with bonuses tied to customer satisfaction KPIs. She didn't squeal. She just smiled quietly and said, "Dad, this is the first time I feel paid fairly, not for my last name." I nodded and didn't add a thing. That sentence paid me back for 6 months of patience, 6 months of standing behind her without carrying her. The Langford family stayed silent. One morning, I got an email from Graham, just 2 words, "Good luck." I read it and deleted it. That's enough. Some things should end in silence. Nobody has to win. Naomi Park, the reporter who once wrote about the wedding gone silent, published a short series online, "From a Wedding Gone Silent to the Machines Running Again," a story of honor, work, and repair. The comments split, then softened. People stopped talking about scandal and started talking about a father who taught his child by letting her fix it herself. One evening, while I was filing papers, I got a call from a stranger. His voice was rough, with a shaky edge. "I'm in Newark. I read about you. I have a son. He's..." started looking down on me because I drive a delivery truck. But I can't do what you did. I'm afraid he'll hate me forever. I spoke low. Don't do what I did, friend. I'm no model. Just do what's right for your house, even if it's small. Don't let silence become the last language between a father and a child. He was quiet a long time. Then he said softly, "Thank you. Maybe I'll start with breakfast together." "That's enough," I said. That night, snow fell again. I stared out the office window, streetlights reflected in the glass like old gold streaks. I was about to shut off the lights when the door eased open. Aubrey came in with a handwritten card. "Dad," she said, small but steady, "thank you for cutting the music," so I could hear myself. I took the card and opened it. Her script tilted but neat, like someone finding balance after a storm. Inside was just one line: "The sound of work is the heartbeat of people." I said nothing. I tucked the card into my drawer, right beside the first wrench I used 30 years ago. Two small things with the same weight: labor and the truth. A week later, Naomi invited me to speak at a Leadership in Blue Collar America event. I turned down the keynote, agreeing only to be filmed briefly in the shop. On camera, I stood between humming AC units, t-shirt stained with a few oil marks, face wrinkled but at peace. I said only one sentence: "Class isn't in your last name, it's in the promises you keep." No flowers, no soundtrack. Just the quiet after that sentence, the quiet of someone who has lost, forgiven, and kept living right. I thought about the road behind us, from table 23 by the kitchen door to this day, watching my daughter run a team that keeps hundreds of apartments warm every winter. I don't want to win any story anymore. I just want to keep the temperature fair between people, between right and easy. Because in the end, self-respect isn't a shield for fighting the world. It's the compass that keeps you from getting lost in your own home. If you're still here with me at these last lines, thank you truly for taking the time to hear the story of an old man who cools rooms but spends his life trying to keep his heart from going cold. I'm Harlan Pierce, a father who once lost his way, kept quiet when he should have spoken, and finally chose to repair what could be saved instead of burning it all down in anger. Maybe in this life, we all end up standing between two sides: image and family, right and easy, forgiveness and self-respect. I only hope that when you reach that fork, you remember the right choice isn't always loud, but it always leaves a longer warmth than any applause. What city are you watching from? Have you ever had to choose between pride and love? If this story made you think of someone or yourself, leave me a few lines in the comments. I read every single one. I mean it. And if you want to walk with me on the next journey, small but real stories about everyday justice, honor, and hearts that haven't gone out, please hit like, subscribe, and catch the next episode. Because sometimes what keeps us warm isn't the furnace, but a right choice late, maybe, but true.